The second presidential debate set to take place on Thursday, but has been cancelled following a disagreement between the campaigns and the Commission on presidential debates regarding coronavirus safety protocols. The status of the debate between President Trump and Joe Biden has cast into doubt as early as Thursday after the commission that organizes the event said it would be held virtually to minimize the risk of spreading infection. The debate, scheduled for the 15th of October in Miami, was to have featured virtual appearances by the two candidates, a change the president quickly dismissed as not acceptable. This came as suspicions grew that the White House was not telling the truth about President Trump's health. To discuss this further, we're joined by Brooks Spector, Associate Editor at Daily Maverick. A very good morning to you, Brooks, and thank you for your time. Thank you for joining us on Weekend Dawn. What would a virtual debate have panned out to be? Like, what would it have looked like, considering that the energy is not the same when it's all virtual, right?
Well, yes and no. I mean, a virtual debate would have had about the same texture as your and my conversation if we both had small audiences gathered in your studio and in my TV and study room. At this point, we are all of us so used to, after 6-8 months of Zoom meetings and Skype meetings and whatever other technologies we happen to use, that for many people it would have seemed perfectly reasonable. And newscasts and evening news programs routinely bring in voices from around the country, indeed around the world, via this kind of technology. It's nothing new anymore, and it's not even particularly novel. What it does do is that it would prevent the kind of close personal interaction, the glaring looks between the two candidates, perhaps, or the scowls and the catcalls that might have come from an audience against one person or the other, and it would have given more control to somebody in a control room in an editing booth to make sure that it remains civil and, if not cordial, at least like adults. Something that was clearly not very much the case in the first presidential debate held just a week or so ago, and that the Trump administration and campaign decided wasn't in their interest. Oddly, as renowned conservative columnist and commentator David Brooks, no relation to me, said last night on the PBS network in the United States, he said, it's a very strange choice. When you're behind in the polls and you elect to go media for an audience of some millions in exchange for avoiding a debate with your only real challenger for an audience of 70 to 80 million people, and at least the chance to gather some people who might still be undecided to your side. And as a result, this really speaks to the quality of the Trump presidential election campaign, which has become increasingly unstable, increasingly disorganized, and increasingly, in message terms, almost chaotic. And the Biden camp, on the other hand, said, no problem, we'll do a virtual debate, not an issue. And when the debate itself was canceled, they scheduled a town hall meeting to be broadcast live on their own, thereby making use of that attention in that time. Wouldn't have gotten the same audience as if there had been a confrontation between the two, but it certainly gives them exposure to people, those few who may still be scratching their heads saying, I don't know what I'm going to do when I cast my vote. Two other footnotes, I think, really are important. It's been usual to think about the election as if it takes place on one day, that is Election Day, and this year that would have been November 3rd. But by now, somewhere north of 8 million or so people have already voted by mail-in ballots or advance voting, and by the time the debate would have happened, there would have been millions more. In other words, the result of the election itself, to some degree, would have already been baked in before the debate and certainly before Election Day itself. And that means that we are in the process of closing options for the president for his reelection rather than continuing to open them.
Now, Brooks, do you think Trump contracting COVID-19 has sort of forged a way for him to take it a lot more seriously when it comes to dealing with the pandemic?
Well, you would have certainly hoped so, and you would have certainly fervently believed that if you come that close to severe illness or even the possibility of passing away, that would really focus your mind in a way which up until that moment had not been the case. But sadly, it appears that it reinforced his determination to continue on the path that he had already been on, which is to say largely to ignore the importance of the social distancing, the wearing of the mask, and allowing for the possibility of contact tracing for any person who shows symptoms. And why do I say this? Because as they were not going to be involved in some events, they scheduled for today in Washington, so Saturday day, a public event for his supporters on the lawn of the White House, an open event which presumably was going to gather hundreds of people in fairly close quarters without the requirement, certainly, of social distancing with the little squares on the ground where you have to stand, and the insistence that everybody must wear a mask and all the rest. And then to go on and schedule several of those large events at airport hangars and similar facilities, once again for large masses of people, without the kind of social distancing provisions that have become the norm. And this perplexes a lot of people. It perplexes me, and it should perplex anybody who's listening to us as to why the president still feels somehow that carrying out any of these standard public health provisions undercuts his vigor, his strength, his manliness, his whatever. I don't even pretend to try to explain it, except that he has an idea of what a president is supposed to look like, and anything that doesn't comport with that gets tossed away.
And do you think the cancellation of this debate at the moment plays in Trump's favor, considering the fact that we're still waiting for a negative COVID-19 test as well? So does this work to his favor?
No, I don't think it works necessarily to his favor. It may not work particularly to his disfavor, because the first debate, or the only debate perhaps, was one in which his demeanor and his behavior were so beyond the normal that a lot of people who might still have been thinking about supporting him appear to have drawn the lesson from that was not a risk they were prepared to take. And so behaving in a way which was even vaguely similar to that in a second debate would have been damaging further to his campaign. But remember, as we look at any of these moves, he is consistently in the polling, in all polling, running somewhere around 10% behind his challenger, and in those key battleground states, places where support is roughly divided, generally speaking, places like Florida, Pennsylvania, Colorado, Arizona, and a few others. The polling there as well shows his opponent, Joe Biden, the former vice president, as significantly ahead. And if you take those as predictive markers, now polls are not predictions, they're simply snapshots of where you are at the moment of the poll. But if you take them as a kind of predictive measure, this means that the president is headed now for a serious beating once the election voting is actually tabulated. And so not showing up for the second debate and behaving in any way similar to the first one might in fact have been, in a strange kind of calculation, safer than it would have been to participate. We're in such unknown and unusual territory. some of these things are becoming almost impossible to judge.
Now, Brooks, in closing, just in 1 minute, in your opinion, when do you think this debate will actually happen, and will it actually happen? And talking about Joe Biden, and you talking about the predictions and who being a lot more favored than the other, do you think the series of unfortunate events that have been upon Donald Trump put Joe Biden in a better position?
Well, I think it solidified Joe Biden's standing with voters and with potential voters, and it has reinforced in their minds that Joe Biden is a safer choice. In other words, we don't wake up in the morning, open the newspaper or turn on your computer and go, oh my goodness, what happened overnight? That kind of fear. And I think many people in the country are at this point clamoring for stability and sobriety and normality. And one other thing, we had the vice presidential debate the other day. Kamala Harris, senator from California, significantly black woman, first time on a ticket. And Mike Pence, the man who is now most famous for having had a fly land on his head for 2 minutes. And in that debate, normally vice presidential debates don't matter all that much because they're not the ones who are being picked to run things. But in this case, they were both, in effect, trying out for the role of, if something should happen to my elderly running mate and head of the ticket, Donald Trump, Joe Biden, am I ready to take on the responsibilities of the president at a moment's notice? So they were, in effect, live auditions for the role of president. And in this case, I think the polling right after the vice presidential debate was very clear that Kamala Harris passed that test and did her ticket, her running mate's ticket, significant support as a result. But to go to the larger question of will the debate, the presidential debate, take place, the schedule is now for October 22nd for the second and now final confrontation between the two men. It will depend a great deal on the president's health between now and then as to whether or not he can do it, he can stand up to it, or even if his campaign managers feel that he should risk it.
Brooks, Spector, we'll leave it right there. Thank you for your time. That was Daily Maverick's Associate Editor, Brooks Spector, speaking to us about U.S. President Donald Trump's objection to the proposed virtual format for the upcoming presidential debate amid growing concerns over his health. As you heard, it'll be taking place later in October. It has been cancelled and won't be taking place next week as planned.